Hey guys, Mr. Breen here, and in this video I'm going to be talking about GDP, or Gross Domestic Product. I think many of you have probably heard of this before, but I'll still write it out here. It is Gross Domestic Product. But that's a lot of big words. What does this really mean? Okay, so I'm going to give you a short definition and a little bit of a longer definition. And the short definition is that GDP, gross domestic product, is equal to output or production. Okay, if I drew a production possibilities curve, I could put whatever there, I don't know, needs, and on the bottom I could put wants, whatever, and it's the amount of these two things that we make. Maybe there, or there, or there. That's gross domestic product, the total amount of what we produce. Now, a little more specifically, our definition is going to have three parts, our longer definition. First, gross domestic product only counts final goods and services. Let me explain what I mean. So, we make cars. Here's a car, right? Okay, yep, recognizably a car, good. It's probably what everybody's car looks like. And the production of that car involves the use of steel. Okay, and boy, it's drawing steel bars, it's like, sort of like that, and it kind of does this kind of thing. There's our steel, okay, and there's our steel bar, yep. So we only want to count the car. We don't want to count the steel that went into the car, because then we'd be double counting. If we counted all the different inputs into the final outputs, then we'd be counting everything double or even many multiples of times. So we only want to count the final output. Now, it's also important to understand that we measure it in dollars, right? In the United States we do. In India, they would measure it in rupees, which is India's currency. Now, we do this instead of just adding up all of the cars and all of the massages and all of the education and all of the pixie sticks, I don't know, and just putting it in a big book that says, oh, we made 10,000 of this and 20,000 of this, and because that book would be too big and it's so much information that it's almost not useful, right? Instead, we just add up how much those things were sold for, and we get a pretty good idea of how much consumers value all the different products that were produced, and we get one nice number. You may remember from the sort of intro to macroeconomics video that this is an aggregation. Also, we only count economic activity that goes on within a nation's borders, no matter who's doing that. So if one of you goes abroad and gets a job abroad, your income, your production there won't count in American GDP, even though you personally are an American, right? If you had a job here, it would count, and it would count even if you were a foreign national in the United States working here and producing stuff. So, a Ford plant in, I don't know, Honduras, that would not count toward American GDP, but a Honda plant in Tennessee, for example, that would count toward American GDP. So again, what GDP really measures is output or production. And this is important because production allows us to get stuff that we want. Okay, stuff we want. Okay, we measure this because when we have more of the stuff we want, we tend to be happier, and that was the whole point in the first place. Now, this does still have some difficulties that we'll get to later, but for most of our purposes, it's sort of all right. Countries with a very low GDP, with a very low level of output, generally speaking, are poorer. They're going to have less access to clean water, food, shelter, clothes, medicine, education, and the stuff that we like. It also allows us to measure productivity, which is something different than production. Okay, productivity can be thought of as production divided by the number of workers. Okay, so this is a very rough way of talking about it. So it's basically GDP divided by workers equals, for the United States, maybe it's very rough. 17 trillion divided by, maybe 150 million, and whatever that is maybe productivity. So what is that? That's a little shy of, 100,000. probably higher than U.S. productivity. This is per person. How much does each person produce? Probably less than that, right? But that's an example of productivity. Now, there are some things that the GDP cannot measure that we would like it to. So one of those things is the black market. So if something is illegal to sell, it's actually going to be really hard. So for example, drugs, many kinds of weapons, okay? These things are going to be very difficult to count up, and so even though they technically are goods and services that are being produced in the country, they're not going to count in GDP. Okay, it doesn't also count equality. So you might have a country that's very rich, okay, high GDP, but also most people are poor. Like straight up poor, not like, oh, we can't afford a television, but like, oh, we can't afford to eat for a day, something like that. Okay, GDP also doesn't count non-market activities, which are basically maybe things you do for yourself. Like you could have paid somebody to do it, like clean your house, okay, wash your car. You could have paid somebody, but instead you did it on your own, not for free. There is an opportunity cost, but that doesn't get counted in GDP, even though technically it is a good or service. It also doesn't count negative externalities such as pollution. Okay. Now this factor makes it look like GDP is higher than it really is, right? But for some things, producing them actually has a cost that isn't taken into account, maybe pollution or maybe something else. It also, importantly, is not a direct measure of quality of life. We all know it's possible to have lots of physical possessions, lots of access to goods or services, and not be too terribly happy. Now, we do think that the more stuff you have access to, the happier in general you probably are. But still, GDP isn't a direct measure of quality of life. There are a lot of things that go into quality of life that have nothing to do with GDP. The quality of your relationships or your being part of a community or something like that.